Kalani Sitake and the BYU Cougars have aspirations of challenging for a Big 12 title this fall. And setting aside the Jake Retzlaff situation, because simply put, we don't know what's going to happen there, we're going to examine what it will take for BYU to remain in that race.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. I'm Jake Hatch, executive producer at the KSL Sports Zone in Salt Lake City, Utah, and 13-year credentialed media member at BYU. I am your resident BYU expert and insider. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day, and thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Go to FanDuel.com, place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you get $200 in bonus bets just like that. Go to FanDuel.com to get started today. Coming up on today's show, we're going to talk about BYU and their QB1. What will it take for BYU to remain in the Big 12 race if Jake Retzlaff is unavailable? We'll talk about that. We're going to talk about another high-profile basketball game. Seems like every single day a new one leaks out. This one involves BYU and Wisconsin. They had a fantastic game in the NCAA tournament this past fall, and they have arranged for a home-and-home neutral site. We'll dig into that as the non-conference slate comes together, and we'll finish up today's show on a conference-wide note because I believe that Brett Yormark absolutely nailed it when it comes to the college football playoff and his philosophy about it. All right. The Jake Retzlaff situation remains completely undefined, and there's no timeline on it. Simply put, I don't think anybody who claims to know what's happening with Jake Retzlaff has a bloody clue what is going on, and I include myself in that. I have been very clear with people who have reached out to me, whether it's via text, DM, phone call, on this podcast, that setting aside that situation, there's no real timeline for it because we're 93 days away from kickoff for the BYU football program from today. It just feels like that's going to be wafting out there forever. I can say this, maybe it's breaking news, maybe it's not, but Jake Retzlaff is working out with BYU right now and his teammates. Obviously, right now, you're not allowed to do on-field positional work with your position coaches, so he's not working out with Matt Mitchell or Aaron Roderick right now, but he is working out with BYU strength and conditioning staff and their sports science team, and he's doing PRPs. They call them player-run practices, or PRP for short, with his teammates. So he is still with his guys. He is still associated with BYU in that circumstance. Is that breaking news? I don't know. I'll let you define that for yourself. But the bigger point is, with that pending, BYU has to turn their attention to what it's going to take to remain in the Big 12 race. Now, our friends at FanDuel, as well as other sports books out there, have essentially installed half of the Big 12 as a potential contender for the Big 12 conference. If you go by over-under win totals, there are 8 of the 16 teams in the Big 12 this year who have either a 7.5 over-under win total or an 8.5 over-under win total, and BYU is among them. The Cougars have been slated with a 7.5 over-under win total, and that obviously is subject to change with the Jake Retzlaff news, but as it stands right now, BYU is in the mix along with half of the conference for conference supremacy. If he is unavailable, what is it going to take for BYU to stay in this race? Well, I think it really comes down to which of the two quarterbacks I believe will absolutely be in the mix for the starting job without Jake, and those would be Treyson Bourguet and McCae Hillstead. Which of them can offer enough for BYU to, as I mentioned, stay in the hunt? That is the question that is going to have to be pondered by Kalani Sitake. It's going to have to be pondered by Aaron Roderick. Anybody involved with the decision-making process about who plays is going to have to weigh that, even with the Jake Retzlaff situation still just pending overhead. It comes down to, in my mind, between at least these two quarterbacks, is which of them offers more of the like-for-like replacement of what Jake Retzlaff offered to the BYU football program. And trust me, I've seen the discourse online. Some are saying that BYU can get as good quarterback play from one of these guys as they got from Jake Retzlaff. And there's other people who say BYU's dead in the water. They've gone from a 10-win team to barely scraping bowl eligibility. I'm kind of in the middle there. I've had expressed to me, and I've also said it on this podcast, that I think that Jake Retzlaff, his value to the BYU football program this fall is probably 1 to 2 wins. I think that that's what he would mean to the BYU football program. So does that mean that if you thought BYU ceiling was 10-2, 11-1, 12-0 in the regular season. That means you could subtract 2 wins off of that in theory. So I kind of thought the 10-2 is what I would have expected for BYU this year. I have said it before that before the Jake Retzlaff news broke, I thought BYU's over-under win total was 9.5 in my personal mind, and 10-2 was what I would have probably slated for BYU at that time. That's obviously subject to change and it has changed because I've now revised it where I think that 8-4 is probably the ceiling with one of these 2 other quarterbacks outside of Jake Retzlaff. But that doesn't mean that either one of them couldn't emerge and become what Jake Retzlaff has been for the BYU football program. We have just not seen that from them. And it comes down to, like I said, who is the best like-for-like replacement for BYU? And that is the philosophical decision that Aaron Roderick, I think, who is the play caller for BYU's offense, is going to have to weigh. McCae, Hillstead, and Treyson Bourguet are very individual quarterbacks. They don't have the same skill set. They share skills. Obviously, Treyson Bourguet, he's got the ability to run the football, but he's more, in my mind, in the mold of, say, Zach Wilson, where he prefers to make plays from the pocket. And I'm not saying he is Zach Wilson, but he's got a big arm, has the ability to really attack down the field with his arm, and if needed, can run the football. Whereas a McCae Hillstead is more in the mold of a Jaron Hall, and I would also say more like a Jake Retzlaff, because he is more of a true dual threat quarterback, and his ability to tuck it and run, it is a preternatural ability that he has. I think I've revealed it on this podcast, and I'll say it again here, is that I was crazily enough lucky to go and call McCae Hillstead's first ever high school start. I was there at Skyridge High School, went out and talked to John Lehman, who was the head coach at the time, said, "Coach, you got a few guys on your roster. Who's going to be starting quarterback tonight?" And he points to this pint-sized QB and says, "That's McCae Hillstead. He's starting for us tonight." And at that point, McCae, who is now listed at 5'10", 195 pounds. So just consider that in the circumstance. If he was taller than 5'9" and $160 in that game, I think he was a sophomore at the time. So this goes back multiple years. I would have been floored. And I was like, okay, this kid's small. Let's see what he's got. And it felt like that game. I don't have the stats in front of me, and I'd have to go back and dig through and see if I still had that stat sheet I kept. It felt like he ran for 200 yards and passed for 200. He was just dynamite. And he showed that time and time again as his high school career progressed. And obviously he's grown to about 5'10". I think legitimately he is 5'10", 5'11" now. But the question always was, does he have the size requisite to really compete at the Division I level? And I think he answered a lot of those questions during his time at Utah State. He had a ugly concussion situation at the end of his run with the Aggies that really marred, I think, his run with USU up in Logan. And he ultimately decided he wanted to come closer to home, be closer to his mom, and enrolls at BYU. His ability to run the football would mean that BYU has a dual threat quarterback in the mold of a Jaron Hall, where you can really QB read options, all that called QB runs, all that stuff, that playbook gets thrown wide open with McCae Hillstead. It's not to say that Treyson Bourguet can't do that. It's just that McCae Hillstead is the more natural and gifted runner of the two. Whereas while McCae, I believe, has a good arm, Treyson Bourguet's got the better overall arm in terms of throwing the football. McCae Hillstead can make every throw that BYU's offense will require of him, but Treyson Bourguet, his ability to sit in the pocket and pick defenses apart, that's another thing. I think it will come down to, if it comes down to it, that's two things, but if BYU doesn't have Jake Retzlaff available, they have to decide which of these two quarterbacks keeps them best in the hunt, and they're going to have to rely on a defense. They're going to have to hope that guys like LJ Martin, Sione Moa, Poka'i Haunga, those guys are going to have to shoulder an extra load, obviously take stress off of a quarterback who hasn't started at BYU before, but they have to make that decision. Which of these QBs keeps them in that Big 12 hunt and hope for the best? That's what it comes down to in my mind. All right, coming up next, we're going to talk some BYU basketball. Seemingly day by day, another high-profile non-conference game gets revealed. Well, this one, it involves a game BYU played just a couple of months back, and that was a thriller against Wisconsin. The Badgers and the Cougars are doing it again, albeit on neutral sites, and I actually kind of like the way they have arranged this. We'll get to that next as you roll on right here on Locked On Cougars. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are rolling on, my friends, and every night seemingly delivers a highlight-worthy performance, a major momentum shift, or a can't-miss moment, if not all the above. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action and do it with our friends over at FanDuel. It makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. And with their player props, performance trends, same-game parlays, and a bevy of other options, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. And the best part is, in big moments of the game, you could track their trends, help you build your next bet with our friends at FanDuel. And the best part is you could look to combine those live prop bets mid-game based on how the action unfolds and put them together in a same-game parlay for an extra large payout if you knock it out of the park. The best part is, how could a $200 bonus add to the excitement if your first $5 bet hits? I think it would add quite a bit. So right now, if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Go to FanDuel.com, place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you get $200 in bonus bets just like that. Make every moment more with FanDuel. They are an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. All right. As always, appreciate all of your guys' support of the podcast. One thing I have been really slow about passing along is, if you have a company, a product, something that you're really proud about, or you're the owner of a business that wants to promote it to thousands of BYU fans, if not the bigger Big 12 universe, advertise with us here on Locked On Cougars. I'd love to have you do it. We've done multiple ad campaigns with local companies out there. And if you are looking for that, make sure to reach out. You can hit us up via social media, hit myself up, or reach out to lockedonbyu@gmail.com. Love to get you squared away and on the path to advertising success right here in the podcast sphere, but obviously reaching thousands of Cougar fans, both here locally in Utah, but literally the reach is worldwide. We have Cougar fans listening all over the world, Middle East, Asia, down in South America. We've had people reach out from literally New Zealand. I think we got some friends down there. The best part is you can reach Cougar fans wherever they're at, and you can do that with this here podcast. All right. Let's talk some BYU basketball, though. Another high-profile matchup coming out. John Rothstein, Robbie McCombs, among others, reporting. I can back it up. People have revealed it to me as well. Is that BYU is in the final stages of finalizing their non-conference schedule for Kevin Young's second year, and one of those games is a high-profile neutral site affair, albeit in Salt Lake City at the Delta Center, against the Wisconsin Badgers. Now, absolutely thrilling game in the NCAA tournament between the Badgers and the Cougars. John Tonje was absolutely unstoppable in that game, and BYU emerged with a hard-fought 91-89 win. Many of you will recall that. But I think this is a really, really smart series for BYU, and just adds, I think, to what I talked about on yesterday's podcast, if you're an everydayer, about how Kevin Young and the BYU Basketball Brain Trust is trying to cash in on everything that a guy like AJ DeBonsa is bringing to the program, and that is eyeballs. It's bringing a ton of attention just himself, but BYU obviously is a story because most people out there have them ranked inside the top 5 in the country. I know that Houston just got Milos Uzan back, and obviously is Milos? Whatever. Bigger point is they're considered to be a favorite, but BYU's right there among the nation's elite. That's the expectation for this Cougar squad, and they have put together a really, really fine non-conference slate. In this Wisconsin game, I think it's the right way to go about it because, A, it's a Power 4, essentially home and home. Now, they're both neutral sites technically because BYU will play Wisconsin at the Delta Center in Salt Lake City. The return trip, according to the reports, and I can back this up, is expected to be played in Milwaukee at the Fiserv Forum, which is the home of the Milwaukee Bucks. So 2 NBA venues, 2 high-level programs, and obviously they can recreate what we got in the NCAA tournament this past March. I'm all for it. I love the fact that this series is starting in Salt Lake. This is not a series that, remember, BYU has signed football series and basketball series over the years before they got into the Big 12, that they would say a program, a Power 5 or a Power 6 at the time, would say, hey, come play us and we'll make a return trip to Provo or we'll make a return trip to the Delta Center. And how often did those get bought out? It felt like quite often, if not the majority of the time, those deals get nixed. I think it wasn't Tennessee. BYU went and played there and obviously got the win in double overtime at Rocky Top. They were supposed to come to Provo. Then they nixed it and played a game in Nashville against Virginia. Great. I love the fact that BYU essentially said, okay, we'll play this. We'll do the home and home, but you're playing in Salt Lake City first. I love it. I fully expect BYU will make that return trip to Milwaukee. They've been very good, speaking of the Cougars, about when they've had deals of this variety. And it drives me a little bit nuts because BYU football is playing at East Carolina this year as part of a home and home deal. They could have bought out of that. They didn't do it. They've tried to be obviously good business partners in that. They also have the pending road game at Wyoming this year in basketball. We'll see if they pay that off. But getting a team like Wisconsin to the state of Utah, even if it is 40 miles north of playing at the Marriott Center, I'll take it. I know that in time you'd like to see high-profile games played at the Marriott Center. I'd love to have a Wisconsin playing in Provo. I'd love to have any of those big-name teams they've scheduled, the Villanovas, the North Carolinas in exhibition. All of those have a lot of high-profile nature to them, but I will take it. Playing at the Delta Center is not a disadvantage in my mind. Cougar fans will travel from all over to watch BYU play wherever they're at because they're going to play against Villanova in Las Vegas. I fully expect that to be a very pro BYU crowd in Vegas on opening night, November 3rd. You go to Orlando. Trust me, I'm married to a Disney holic. I call my wife, and I love her to death. I love Disney myself, but the chance to go to Disney World over Thanksgiving, you can't tell me that there's not going to be Cougar fans in the stands watching BYU play in that. They're calling it, what is it, the something chocolate invitational, whatever. I love the fact that BYU is scheduled up, and this Wisconsin game is just the latest in a long run here this week of high-profile games that are obviously going to push the needle or move the needle when it comes to the national media. BYU already is going to have a ton of people watching them. It's just par for the course when you have the potential top overall pick in the NBA draft in AJ DeBonsa. Richie Saunders, he has absolutely emerged as a bona fide star on the Big 12/Power 4 level. You look at the other players that BYU's brought in, Robert Wright III. They have put together a fantastic roster that's going to draw a lot of eyeballs, and the nature of the games BYU also is scheduled, traveling across the country, going to Boston to play UConn, going to Orlando for the MTE event, playing in Las Vegas, playing in Salt Lake City multiple times. In this circumstance, was against Wisconsin. They are going to be a household name, and that's what I love about BYU basketball. They're not shying away, and what was it ranked? It was like 340 something last year with their non-conference schedule, with just the pits. I'm not going to lie. I was really out on BYU's non-conference slate last year, and I get the circumstance they found themselves in because it was the hiring situation of Kevin Young and putting a schedule together. You had to kind of deal with it, but I much prefer what BYU's doing with this basketball scheduling and having a two-game deal with Wisconsin. It shows the BYU absolutely is working themselves into the national consciousness when it comes to hoops. This is a BYU athletic department that for years was defined by the BYU football program, and basketball has had its moments because they've had the Danny Ainges, they've had the Jimmer Fredette's, but what Kevin Young has made BYU basketball into, I don't think we can say that it's ever happened like this before, where BYU football draws major eyeballs. It draws 60,000+ people to every home game. And I get all that, but hasn't BYU basketball kind of become the co-headliner for BYU sports with what Kevin Young has really engineered here in a very, very short time? Remember, he's just over a month. We're just past essentially a year and a month since his hiring at BYU. And we're a little further than that, but you get the point. It's really, really cool to see what BYU basketball has become in short order. And games of this variety, Wisconsin, Villanova, UConn, they are going to be ones that people will tune into when college basketball struggles to get any sense of traction, it feels like, in the local sports scene. I can tell you, working in sports radio as long as I have, when it comes to the non-conference of college basketball, the true diehards are the ones that watch these games. And if there's a Utah Jazz game, now we have the Utah Mammoth in hockey. Those often take priority over the Mississippi Valley States of the world coming to Provo, Utah. No offense, but I'd rather watch the Utah Jazz take on anybody in the NBA than watch Mississippi Valley State play BYU. Now, you guys know that for my job doing this podcast, I watch all the BYU games, but you get the point. What BYU is scheduled here, these games that they have scheduled, these high-profile ones, the most recent one being that Wisconsin game, those are the ones that people will say, Jazz are playing tonight or BYU's playing Wisconsin. I'm going to tune in and watch BYU play the Badgers. That is what BYU has done here. And I love the fact that the opening of the two-game set is in Salt Lake City at the the Delta Center, excuse me. And the best part is, it's going to kind of stand alone. It's on a schedule, according to John Rothstein, for November 21st, which is the Friday night before BYU's final road game in football at Cincinnati the next day. So if you're planning on going to that Cincinnati game to get some Skyline chili, watch it from your hotel room. All right, coming up next, we will finish up today's show more on a conference-wide note. I think that Brett Yormark has the right mentality when it comes to the college football playoffs future, and he is trying to play the best hand that has been dealt to him in a pretty tough circumstance because, quite honestly, the SEC and the Big Ten don't want anybody but themselves to control everything. But Brett Yormark, I think, has approached this the right way, and we'll explain why next. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you have not done so already, sign up for the Locked On Cougars Insider Group, get the inside scoop on all things BYU sports that I am hearing. Coming to your phone in the form of a text message. And the best part is you can have one-on-one conversations with myself by responding via text. And as always, you get a 14-day free trial to see if it's the right option for you guys. And it's just $5 a month to be a part of the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. All right, before we go on today's show, Brett Yormark is down there at the Big 12, they call them Big 12 business meetings or spring business meeting, whatever they call it. It's at the Waldorf Astoria, just outside the gates of Disney World in Orlando, Florida. And I think it's a pretty smart place to hold these because people love traveling to Florida. But the bigger point is, he told The Athletic this yesterday, quote, let me back up. Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark, this comes from Chris Vanini of the Athletic, says he tells The Athletic he's strongly behind the 5+11 CFP model, even if the league might not get 2 bids in a given year. So let me back up. The 5+11 model is there's a proposal for a 16-team college football playoff. That is obviously where this is going. It's going to go from the 12 teams to 16. Just get ready for it. Next year, 2026, there'll be 16 teams. The model format has been the big question. The Big Ten and the SEC have favored having 4 automatic bids for themselves, 2 automatic bids for the Big 12 and the ACC, 1 for the G6, and then essentially 3 at-large bids. The 5+11 CFP model here that is being espoused by Brett Yormark is having 5 automatic qualifiers, much like what we had last year, where the top 5 conference champions get the automatic bids, and those often would favor, obviously, the 4 of the Power 4 and the top G6 conference champion. Those would be and then the other 11 are at large. Now, history suggests that this actually would work out more in the favor of the SEC and the Big Ten, because the SEC, if you go back and look at essentially the rankings of the CFP going back since its inception, the SEC would get more often than 5 teams in this model. More than the 4 automatic, they would get 5 in. Now, they obviously want to have the 4 automatics to qualify that, but I love what Brett Yormark said to say about this. He says, with regards to the league might not even getting 2 bids in a given year, says, quote, that's okay because we've got to earn it on the field. I tell my room, speaking of the conference commissioners and presidents of universities, you're rewarded when you perform at the highest levels, unquote. Brett understands that he's at a disadvantage when he's trying to negotiate this stuff. Greg Sankey went on the warpath earlier this week saying that you guys can put together your statements about how you want for the best of the game. Don't dictate to me how to do the best of the game. Here's the thing, Greg Sankey, you're trying to ruin the game that we love. Now, there's obviously the question out there saying, well, do Saturdays still feel the same? For now, they do. But if the SEC takes its ball and goes home and the Big Ten follows suit, is anybody going to feel the same about how the college football universe feels? No. The other thing about this is we're seeing the SEC and the Big Ten discuss having a scheduling alliance where they would play 9 conference games each. That would obviously require the SEC to upgrade their conference schedule to 9. And then obviously play a crossover game, Big Ten and SEC. That makes essentially 10 games. That would ace out the ACC and the Big 12, including BYU, from really ever playing another game against a Big Ten or an SEC school, wouldn't it? Because I don't see them being all that willing to take an 11th P4 game. They probably have one FCS game, and they obviously probably would play a G5 opponent, a directional school localized to where they're at, speaking of the Big Ten or the SEC. I love the fact that Brett Yormark says we got to earn it on the field. We have to go out there, punch these guys in the nose, and earn their respect. Now, I know that the question will be, can you really ever earn their respect? Maybe not. But I prefer the 5+11 model myself, speaking as a host of this podcast. Give the top 5 conference champions the automatic bids, and then, let the chips fall where they may. If there's a year that the SEC is absolutely dominant, they get 6 teams in, so be it. There's a year that the Big 12 deserves to have 2 or 3 or 4 teams in, great. Let's go for it. I'd rather have that than be automatically kind of slotted. Well, you get 4, speaking of the SEC. You get 4, speaking of the Big 10. The Big 12 and the ACC get 2 each. I'd rather have it based more on merit than allocation. Does that make sense? I hope it does. The other side of it is I don't want to see any stratification of the playoff. I want it 1 versus 16, 2 versus 15, all the way down. I want it, as I say, March Madness style. I want it a true bracket, and you earn your way to the college football playoff title game and ultimately a college football national championship. Now, will that ultimately come out in the fray? Probably not, because I would imagine they would probably try and stratify it where maybe the top 2 seeds get a first round bye. But I can respect the way that Brett Yormark is approaching this, because I think he's got the right mentality. I think he understands he's trying to read the room as best he can when it comes to the Big 12. And not more often than not, I think the bigger thing he's trying to do is essentially put on a brave face and tell the SEC and the Big 10, we ain't scared of you. Maybe he is. Maybe he is terrified that they are going to take that ball and go home and create what could be a separate league, NFL light between those two leagues where they contest their own national championship. You want to talk about ruining college football? Yeah, have the Big 10 and the SEC where they have the vast majority of their schools in the central and eastern time zones. I know there's some out in the West, obviously the West Coast with the Big 10. But that alienates millions of college football fans, including BYU, Big 12, and ACC schools. That's not the way to go about this sport. This sport has already been jacked with multiple times, and it's lost some of its luster, quite honestly. And yeah, Saturdays still feel the same right now. But if it keeps going the way that it seems like it's trending, Saturdays are going to feel a whole lot different in due time. And I hope that Brett Yormark, he prevails in those meetings and they do adopt the 5+11 model, because as I mentioned, I want it more on merit. And yes, if BYU or a school out there like Arizona State last year is the only team to make it in a given year, so be it. The Big 12 didn't earn it. And I know that you're going to say, well, the brand names are always going to have advantage when it comes to the at-large bids. It's just part of the college football playoff committee. They're going to put people on that committee who have their biases, and you can't do anything about it but adopt what it is. There's some people who say we need to go back to the computer system and essentially have BCS type numbers run things and determine what the college football playoff field would be, the top 16 teams, according to a computer. That has its own issues. This is a sport that's always inherently had issues in it. I freely acknowledge that. But I hope that what Brett Yormark is saying here is that, yeah, we want it to be based more on merit. We want to prove ourselves on the field and give us the chance to do that. We'll take it. I can respect that. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you completely disagree and you think that they need to guarantee at least 2 to have any hopes of being a national power player, speaking of the Big 12, and I welcome your feedback on it. But I really do think what Brett Yormark is saying here is the right mentality to have at this juncture. It's always subject to change, because it sure feels like the SEC and the Big 10 will dictate the terms that this sport is played on until they decide they don't want to play it anymore. But I think for the time being, Brett Yormark, he is trying to fight fire with as much fire as he possibly can muster. And I think is advocating for the 5+11 model versus kowtowing to the 4-4-2-2-1 model that is being espoused by the SEC and the Big 10. All right, so I'll step off my soapbox now, but as always, thank you so much for your guys' support of the podcast. Please continue to subscribe, rate, review, share with your family and friends. As I mentioned, if you'd like to advertise with the show, reach out to us via social media or email us, lockedonbyu@gmail.com. Love to get you squared away and on the way to having success in the advertising space when it comes to podcasting. But as always, once again, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And once again, thank you for being everydayers right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.